America, my name is Osei-Frimpong, and you're watching The Black Athenians. I come to you Friday, usually at 4-ish. I'm doing a little bit early today because I'm going into Atlanta to take part in the DSA convention. That should be fun and interesting. But today we're going to talk about the difference between brave space and safe space, because everyone talks about safe space. Safe space is very important. I got to protect my feelings, and safe space is important insofar as you're being really threatened, not your ideas necessarily, but like actually physically, like there's an existential threat. If there isn't an existential threat, and even if sometimes there is, like it's not like Jesus or Martin Luther wanted a safe space. They're like, that was actually what he was negotiating in Gethsemane, depending on who you talk to. So, like, at all point in time, we should be worried about safe space. That doesn't mean you should throw yourself into an unmediated, hostile environment, but that the entitlement to safety and the appearance of safety, because often we're talking about the appearance of safety or the feeling of safety, not actual safety, is kind of the wrong God. And it becomes an idol very quickly, and it becomes idolatrous very quickly. And honestly, if you care about safety, it becomes pretty anti-black male rather quickly for a variety of reasons. So all these, like this is how stop and frisk and all of these policies that start out being about safety end up becoming an anti-black man, real smooth like. So I'm not for a safe space, I'm for brave space. And I tell my students this like the first day. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an expanded lecture on what I usually give them on why safe space is bad and why brave space is appropriate, because it actually makes you think. And I'm going to do that after the intro. Hit the beat.
To the beat, y'all.
Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front.
And we are back. All right, so students come into my room, hopped up on safe space. Everything's a safe space, especially the women and the white ones. Everything has to be a safe space. I'll be honest, I always assume every one of my students is a survivor of something awful. I just assume that, and they don't want to be triggered. And the problem is I teach logic and critical thinking or philosophy, and it's a very triggering subject. So and it's about how, because, in theory, not just in theory, Socrates died because he triggered too many of the Athenian residents. So they got around and got together and they killed him. And depending on who you talk to, the same thing happened to Jesus. Depending on who you talk to, Martin Luther King triggered too many white people. And the civil rights movement was not a safe space. People died because when white people get triggered, they get violent. Does that mean you organize the entire movement around not triggering white people? Well, that's not particularly how justice happens. That's how you get, the Civil War was not about not triggering white people. It was like, we're gonna have to trigger them. We stopped when the end of Reconstruction is what happened when we decided that white feelings mean more than justice. So safe space. The idea is that, look, once I'm triggered, I stop thinking. And if you want a space for academic discourse or political discourse, I can't be triggered because I stopped thinking, and that's not good for anybody. The problem is, and it then shunts the discourse to, deforms the discourse to conform to whatever won't trigger the people in the audience, as opposed to truth. Because sometimes the truth is triggering. For a lot of white people and for a lot of people in general, the truth is going to be triggering, but it's the truth. So there's no truth and reconciliation committee except unless the truth is triggering. No, it's truth and reconciliation. And if you're triggered, then you got to suck it up. You probably shouldn't have done what you did, or that's just part of the job. Part of the job of being human. And I sometimes my 3 and 4-year-olds get triggered and they stop thinking when they get frustrated. And you know what I call that? A tantrum. So we need to, it doesn't stop. We need to stop pretending that 40, 50, and 60-year-olds don't throw tantrums, because they do. When they don't want to think, they stop thinking, and then and maybe it might link into some trauma or past trauma or whatever. It doesn't matter. If it's getting in the way of you and truth, you can't make that everybody else's problem and still call yourself a good person. So I'd say like not safe space, brave space, because safe space is can happen without moderation. There's no moderation built into safety. You can always be more safe. You can have another gate. You can have another wall. You can have another contract. You can have a prenup for your prenup for your prenup. You, like this quest for surety, this addiction to certitude is a problem for anyone who cares about justice and a problem for anyone who cares about truth, because the just thing, the right thing, the true thing is not going to be the certain thing. Often the certain thing, the sure thing, is the awful thing, is the unjust thing. Like if I give an alcoholic, I want people to be addicted because that way they'll certain to come back, right? Like pathologies are certain. Freedom is not certain. It's actually very delicate, right? So if you're looking for safety, it's you don't do good things for the world. You need enough stability for that so that you can make plans and other people can make plans. But safety is not necessarily of a piece with either truth or justice. In fact, the things people do to keep themselves safe are often really gross. Just think about it. Think about all of the people who've thrown you under the bus for the sake of their own safety. And honestly, it even goes deeper than that. The things parents do to keep their kids safe often like make the kids more vulnerable. Right? So if you try to hermetically seal your kids in the name of safety, it turns out that they're naive, and then when making their own choices later on in life, will be either too naive or too like they themselves will be entitled to a feeling of safety, so they'll do horrible things to other people for the sake of their own safety. So safety can't be first. It should be like top 3, but after like truth and beauty and justice and all, top 4, top 5. Safety, make it top 5. But if you worship it, it's an idol that will end up, I think, actually eating itself and imploding. Instead of safety, we should go to a brave space model. Right? Brave space model, you take this from Aristotle. Bravery is the middle between rashness on one side and cowardice on the other. Rashness on one side and cowardliness on the other. So it requires that you think. You don't have to think for safety. You can always be more safe without thinking. Just more locks and more whatever. But for bravery, you actually need to think to make sure that you're not rash and you're not cowardly. So you actually need thought. The problem is people kind of resent thinking, and they resent the idea that there's an acceptable amount of risk. There is an acceptable amount of risk. There's the appropriate amount of risk. If you try to get all risk out of your life, not only will it not work, you'll be a danger to like everyone around you and possibly yourself. Let me think about relationships with people. Like again, like think about all of the times, especially black people who watch this, or white people who think they care about black people. Think about all of the times that your life has been jeopardized, or your livelihood, or your quality of life, or your freedom has been jeopardized by other people thinking of you as a liability or a risk. And white people who watch this, think about all the times people have like just eaten your risk for you. You were a liability. You were a risk, and they just kind of ate it. They're like, well, you're a risk, but you're my cousin. Or you're a risk, but I have money and you need it, so I gotta give it to you. So like that's the difference between white life and black life. Black life, if you're a risk, you're just kicked out. White life, if you're a risk, they're like, well, we can start a conversation about how much of a risk are you. Or like it doesn't even matter if you're a risk. I think of all the white stories I have of my friends who like spent like a decade on pills or something like that, and then someone took a risk on them, and then they failed, and then they took another risk on them, and then like the idea of startup capital. Anyway, so instead of safety first, we need to think about what's the appropriate amount of vulnerability. because it can't be zero. If it's zero, if you live in a world where you don't think you should be vulnerable to anyone, or you have friends who live in worlds where they don't think that they should be vulnerable to anyone, they're actually dangers to themselves and other people. Because then they kind of hold everyone around them and the world hostage to their feeling of vulnerability, of potential vulnerability. And that is a dangerous place to be, right? That's a dangerous place to be. Bravery, on the other hand, takes thought. It takes concern about this situation. All right, what's the right thing to do in this situation? What does this situation mean? What are the potential dangers? What are the potential virtues? What does it mean that I'm willing to do this to this other person to get rid of a little bit of a risk on my side, right? Like, how can I be just to them? How can I enable them? It becomes a different kind of conversation. Think about, all right, so a boulder does not have to be brave to roll down a hill. An experienced downhill skier doesn't have to be as brave as, say, a beginning downhill skier. And a beginning downhill skier has to be really brave. But if you don't get over that, if you're not brave at the beginning, you'll never become an experienced downhill skier. All right? So the question is, what kind of bravery do we need to teach our kids so that they will, at some point in time, become the experienced whatever? Right? How good of a friend can you be if you're not brave? And if you're always worried about safety? Or if you're always expecting the entire world to accommodate your feeling of safety. How good of a friend can you be? I need my friend to be brave. I need my wife to be brave. I told her, before we got married, so I might get arrested a few times. Here, that just might happen. Here's the lawyer you should probably call. And that's that. Here's what you should tell our kids. How good of a friend, how good of a spouse can you be if you're not brave? Right? Like, what do those vows mean for richer, for poor, for better, for worse, if you don't have any sense of bravery? If you think if you're entitled to safety? Does richer, poor, better, for worse, sickness and health mean anything if one party is entitled to safety? I don't think so. Because, richer, poor, better, and worse, that means, on the bad side of all those things is going to be vulnerability. You're going to feel unsafe. You might actually even be unsafe. Right. What we are doing when we sign those vows are negotiating the right amount of instability. And saying that we are pretty much forswearing a life of zero instability. Where there's going to be instability. We're just saying that we're going to deal with it. That's pretty much what a marriage is. We're going to deal with the instability. If you want a marriage where there's no instability, you don't really want a marriage with a person. You don't want to be married to a person. You want to be married to a ticket out of the regular instability that is being a person. All right? So we need a more mature understanding of... That's something funny in chat. Yeah, I don't know what you want. If you marry a black man and want safety first, I don't know what to tell you. Your black man might lose his job, or you're gonna want him to suck up to all the white people, because that's the only way you can come up with as a black man to guarantee safety. That just means you'll suck up to all the white people around. You'll do hand stuff, whatever it takes. whatever. So if you want to be in a relationship with a black man who's not just sucking up to white people all their life, you're going to marry an instability, because white people get nervous. I make white people nervous. And when white people get nervous, they get triggered and they lash out. So if you're around me, some of that lash out might get on you. And you might just, if you want to be my friend, you're just going to have to say that. Well, that's just part of the deal of being Ironman's friend. There are perks of being my friend, though. I was joking with a guy about working in his department. And what happens when like someone comes up with a package saying like, do you know Iron Man? And the guy's like, no, I don't know. Who is that guy? Like I got a lot of people in my life who are like Peter in the Bible who'd be like, Jesus, who? Jesus, I don't know him. Or like I can imagine getting hired in a department, but they keep my office like way over there. they keep my office way over there because they don't want to be collateral damage to something I might say or do. But the real people will know that like all I say and do is the truth. You shouldn't be hired to the truth. You shouldn't be scared of the truth. So that's just it's my life. I live it every day, and it's actually good. And the people who take my classes actually, my reviews are better than you would ever imagine. And honestly, I'll say it. My reviews are probably better than yours, because they are. So, because I teach bravery and my classroom's a brave space, but like bravery requires thought and concern and like knowledge and wisdom. But safety doesn't require those things. It just requires more locks. Like the illusion of safety, especially the illusion, real safety is complicated, but the illusion of safety requires like more police and more locks. And anybody who actually studies these things know that actually that's just the illusion of police, because police don't make you more safe. They just give you the illusion of safety. They give you easier access to state-sponsored violence, which is fine if you don't think it's going to be targeted to you, which is why, I don't know, white women love the police because they never think that they're going to be criminals or it's going to be like targeted at them, because it isn't. So like if you think feminism and like will lead to like fewer cops, I don't know what to tell you. Depending on who you talk to, there's theories that say like once we emancipated women from the household, which is good, what happened was that we had to secure all of society for the feeling of safety of like some high class women. So that's how we got our police state. It's also one of my fears about open borders and the notion of open borders. Open borders means that now national security isn't each nation's problem. Now the whole world's security becomes the United States problem, because anybody can come to the United States. So we have to secure the whole world from threats, because any of those threats could come into the United States. It turns the world into like an empire, in the U.S. as the global center in a way that's inappropriate. So I'm not an open borders guy. You get asylum and you get amnesty, but like there should be a process. And I want other nations taking care of their problems, and we could take care of our problems, and that way everybody can like self-determine themselves. I don't think of open borders as self-determination, because nations are institutions of self-determination. I exercise my self-determination through voting for the person who represents me in the United States. And the same way someone in Honduras represents their self-determination by voting for the person who represents them in Honduras. But if like people from Honduras can come to the United States, now Honduras becomes my problem, in the way that like there's going to be policy incentives to like control Honduras. And I don't want to control Honduras. I want Honduras to be self-determining. But that just means it also has to be like sequestered, or not hermetically sealed, but like there needs to be a process. So I'm for borders in general. I'm for borders because I think nations are institutions of self-determination. They can be barriers to it, but they're also necessary institutions for it. Excuse me. 1 second. So we need to think. Thank you. Woo, I was parched. I gotta stay hydrated. Spitting all this fire. So, we don't want safe space, we want brave spaces. And brave spaces entitle thought. There's a limit to what you can do and not think. Right? I actually, one of the best books, I think it went down as one of the best, books written by a politician. Apparently, Grant's autobiography is pretty good. But Profiles in Courage is a fantastic book. And depending on who you talk to, it wasn't written by Kennedy. It was written by Sorensen. But let's pretend that Kennedy wrote it. And Bobby Kennedy's introduction to it's actually really good too. But Profiles in Courage is a really important thing because there's a limit to what you can. It's a really important book because there's a limit to what you can do if you're not courageous, and there's a limit to what you can be if you're not courageous, and there's a limit to what your kids can be if you don't teach them that courage matters and that bravery matters. Right? And so in the book, Bobby Kennedy starts out with how bravery is the first virtue. This is in the intro to the newest version. Bobby Kennedy wrote it. Starts out bravery is the first virtue, and that politicians are actually really terrified of not being liked. And it takes a certain amount of bravery to risk not being liked if you're a politician, because you want to be liked, you want to be popular. And so this is all. It was a story. It was 8 profiles of people who risked really not being liked. I mean, there's bravery. It's almost easier to charge a hill than it is to risk like your parents or whatever not liking you. I can train in some ways. And I suspect even military people will admit this. And I can run into no small number of military people who are scared of their spouse. I will send me to Kabul. I go home and she terrifies me. So everything's just easier if she likes me. So just I'll go snipe somebody. So it's easier to charge a hill than risk being liked in some ways, depending. Risk not being liked, right? And so Bobby Kennedy lays it down in the introduction pretty well. But then in the profile of the book that JFK wrote, the actual book, he goes through 8 people who risked a lot of things: their career, their livelihood, their esteem, their reputation for doing the right thing. And usually most of them died pariahs, but then 15 years later they realized, oh yeah, they were right the whole time. That's that was the theme running through Profiles with Courage. That's one of the reasons I do these, so that my kids can watch them. I might not leave them a lot in terms of money, in terms of legacy, but I'll leave them these videos so that they'll kind of watch and kind of see how to think through the world and their problems in the world. And hopefully the videos that you're watching right now make the world the kind of place that's good to my kids. Right? So that's kind of my contribution to the world. And if you support me doing this contribution, and you should, go ahead and go to thefunkyacademic.com and sign up to give me some money, because I have to pay rent on this studio and I'd like to pay the people who help me a little bit more. And depending on who you talk to, spitting this kind of truth makes me somewhat unemployable when I go in the job market a year or so in advance from now. So, and I do not want to be, I'd rather be employable. The best way to make me employable is to share this video everywhere, and we just terraform the employment market so that I'm just normal, right? Right now, in the same kind of what Bernie Sanders did with Medicare for All, where when he said it in the beginning of 2015, people were like, what are you talking about? I like the marketplace, kind of. But now, it's just normal. The best way to make me employable is just to share this on all your listservs, on all your friends, and tell all your friends, because then I'm normal, and then I get a job. Second best thing to do is just give me money. Because that way, even if I don't get a job when I go on the market, I'll still be able to pay for music lessons for my kids and keep the lights on, right? So you should go to thefunkyacademic.com. You should sign up for $5, $15, or $50 a month, or just give me a one-time enormous donation, or you should just give right now in Super Chat if you're watching me live. Although I don't know how many people would be watching me live. Go ahead and click on the 74. Yeah, because I'm coming early. I usually don't come this early. But you can click on Super Chat and give me money, then all the money spends. Me, like the American dollar, is very promiscuous with respect to money. I need it. Don't care who it comes from. Just give it to me, and I'll spend it hours I feel like it. But it'll be good because you kind of know the quality of my mind and what I try to do here. You don't get rich doing what I'm doing. That's the truth. Or I'd be on CNN or something like that. So not safe space bravery. There's a limit to what kind of relationships you can have if you're not brave and if the people you're not dealing with aren't brave. Can you be a good colleague if you're not brave? Black people, you all know people who have sold you out or thrown you under a bus because if they just had just a little bit more bravery, a little bit more sense of thought with respect to risk, they would have known had we had you stayed together, you would have won. Like it's not an accident that snitching matters. Like, just a little bit more backbone, and we could have done this, but you'll get sold out. So, yeah, what kind of relationships can you have if you're not brave? Can you really have a real relationship with a spouse who's not brave, right? Can you really have a real relationship with a colleague who's not brave? Can you really have a real relationship with a child who's not brave? Even. Especially an adult child who's not brave. No. Yeah. Can you really have what kind of relationship can you have with your parent if your parent isn't brave? No, you find yourself always accommodating their fears. It's a relationship not governed by the truth, but a relationship governed by their anxiety. So you need a certain people need a certain sort of bravery in order to be free as people, or you're just holding each other hostage to your pathologies or your anxieties, right? Like a boulder doesn't need bravery to fall down a hill. A lion doesn't need bravery to go like run down a gazelle, and honestly, a gazelle doesn't need bravery to go out and feed in the savannah. It doesn't really need bravery; it's hungry. But people need bravery. In order to recognize other people as rightful free people, right? So this is one reason why if I try to exert my rights against a boulder, don't roll over me as a matter of right. The boulder will roll over me because the boulder will not be able to recognize and like choose to stop. If I try to exert my right to my arm against a hungry lion, it won't work. The hungry lion's going to eat me because that's what lions do. They eat me. Or tigers. Tigers are apparently more hippos. All of those are very vicious animals. If I try to just exert my rights, like they'll just eat me. Like I need the other person to be brave enough to recognize my rights. I need the other person to be brave enough to recognize my rights and act in a certain way. Because this is why people who are cowardly will throw you under a bus. They're not going to recognize your rights. They're not going to recognize your humanity. They're just going to recognize their own fear. So I need a world of brave people in order for me to be free. And what I will promise you is I will be brave. I'll try to model courage. And I try to do this every Friday at 4 p.m. And if you appreciate me modeling courage, not necessarily, in a well-ordered world, courage will pay. But unfortunately, the world is not yet as well ordered as it should be, so courage doesn't pay as well as it is ought to. So that's why I need you to go over to thefunkyacademic.com and kind of help me run the show. The show takes money. Bills have to be paid. All right, so what kind of relationship can you have with someone who isn't brave? And why do you need bravery? Why do we all need bravery in the way that a rock doesn't need to be brave? Also, I can't assert my rights against a rock. A tiger doesn't need to be brave. Also, I can't assert my rights against a tiger. Right? The only people who you don't need to be, like, I'm thinking about pathological people who can't be brave because they're governed by a pathology, right? Like if you're addicted to meth, bravery, you're addicted to meth, right? But you're also like, in some ways, not a whole person, and you're definitely not free, right? So if we're talking about relationships of freedom, they're going to include choices, and that means choices could come. You could always choose to do the small thing, but I'm going to need you to be brave to not choose to do the small thing, to actually do the right thing. So I need you to be able to be the kind of thing that can think about what the right thing is and then be brave enough to actually enact it. Right? And honestly, sometimes you need to be brave enough to think. Some people don't want to think because they're scared. They don't want to think about the situation. And if you don't want to think, that means you're just either giving yourself over to a pathology or you're just treating yourself like a thing. If you don't want to think. But some people are too scared to think because they're scared of what will happen when they do think. They're scared of what will happen. Sometimes they're scared of who they'll remember themselves to remind themselves that they are. Right? There's a great part in Nietzsche's Use and Abuse of History for Life where he says, like, thank goodness we could forget, because if we couldn't forget, we'd be so horrified and paralyzed with shame for what we've done. Like, I'd be so paralyzed and horrified by 13-year-old irony that I wouldn't be able to do anything. So thank goodness we could forget. But the better your memory, the more bravery you need, because you need to act in the face of like paralyzing shame or the feelings of shame or horror. All right, so there's no exit strategy from bravery. And people who think they can have a productive discourse while preserving everyone's feelings of safety aren't serious about having a productive discourse. They're serious about the safety. And yeah, there's a great, Jane Elliott does not have safe spaces. Jane Elliott's that blue-eyed, brown-eyed, the white lady who plays no games when it comes to race. She's one of these white ladies that's actually appropriate. But like, it's not a safe space. It's a brave space. She presses as hard as she needs to press. And some people she's got to break because they need to be broken. Like the illusion that we can be good without being broken from time to time is or appropriately well traumatized is just that, an illusion. So we need to think in terms of Jane Elliott. Jane Elliott is a person, the old little white lady who plays no games about race. Like John Brown was not worried about his safe space, right? So we need bravery in order to think, because sometimes thinking entails understanding that, the people you want to look up to aren't that great. So you need bravery in order to think about that. You need bravery in order to actually appreciate that maybe your parents aren't that great, or your teachers aren't that great, or your spouse isn't that great, or your kids aren't that great. But if you care more about the truth, or if you care more about like being a good parent, being a good spouse, being a good whatever, friend, lover, employer, you need to be able to see the parts where you're not that great. And then improve upon them. And that takes thought. And that takes courage to actually understand yourself as being not that great. And in a world that just wants to indulge you, sometimes, depending. For black people, it just wants to prison us. But for a lot of white people, it just wants to indulge you and fool you and distort your view of reality and make you think that you're better than you are. And so it will take the easy way out. And you have to I'm going to leave with just understanding about institutions. Every person you met has emerged through an institution, a family, a church, a school, or whatever. And those institutions have an interest in their desires, right? The school wants you to care about school. The family wants you to care about family. The church wants you to care about church. And sometimes that interest in the business wants you to care about the business. And sometimes that interest in your desire isn't the best for your health, your mental health, or your freedom, or whatever. So these institutions have an interest in forming your desires to fit the institution, to care about if your work. This is why blue chip athletes probably shouldn't ask their coach what classes to take, like in order to become a lawyer, right? Because the coach doesn't even care if you get CTE. Like the coach cares about you in that game, right? The coach is part of an institution that wants you to desire more about football than your brain, literally. So you need to understand that it takes courage to buck that institutional desire, right? So there are some good coaches who will say, like, no, don't play this game. You need to quit the team and study for the LSAT. Those coaches are rare. And those coaches usually don't stay in coaching very long because they get fired, right? Or apparently Dean Smith, one of them. Well, not Michael. It wouldn't be Dean Smith. Maybe Dean Smith. Someone. One of the NCAA coaches, basketball coaches, was really good about his kids graduating. Maybe the guy at Duke, Coach K. I don't know. One of them was really good about making sure his people graduated, which is rare. He actually cared about like that they learn things. So that's rare, but usually those coaches don't last for very long because their institutional role needs them to desire a win more than like the health, wealth, and well-being of their players, right? While if they're good coaches, pretending and giving the appearance that they care about the health, wealth, and well-being of the players, right? So the best coach from the institution standpoint is going to appear to care about the health, wealth, and well-being of the players while caring about winning no matter what, right? And that's the coach from the institutional standpoint. But you're going to need a coach, or you're going to need to be a person or employer or a boss or whatever that actually has courage to buck the institution for the sake of, goodness, health, wealth, well-being of the person that they don't necessarily have to, right? So anybody who cares more about their crappy job than being good to you is going to sell you out for their crappy job. And that's a problem. So for a lot of reasons, in order to be good, you need to be courageous. In order to think, you need to be courageous because you might be scared. A lot of people are scared to think. Because a lot of people come from bad places and they're scared to think about them. But you only work through it. But if it's not your fault, that's not your fault. And two, even if it is your fault, you only work through it through thinking about it. So a lot of people are scared to think it's not the most responsible disposition. So it's not just scared to act, it's scared to think. And you need courage in order for any of us to be free. Because I need courage. I need you to have courage in order to recognize my humanity when the institution tells you not to recognize my humanity. And the institutional logic depends on you functioning in a way that doesn't recognize my humanity, right? And that's the college coach whose institutional logic like almost impels them to not recognize the humanity of their players. So thank you for your time. I'll be with you next week. And I think we're going to talk about Marianne Williamson next week. I don't know. She said some things that I liked. All right. Peace.